Welcome to the Photography Opinion Podcast. We discuss all things photo, video, and camera related. I'm Ben Lucas.
And I'm Stuart Marlantis.
And this is Photo Op. Welcome, Photo Op Podcast listeners. This is episode 23, and this is Art versus the Artist.
As promised.
As promised.
Yeah.
So what we are talking about today is when can you separate the art from the artist? Mm-hmm. This show is not a political show. We give you tips and tricks for making cool art. Mm-hmm. But this is something that has been coming up a lot recently. There are some things that are political issues, like should school levies pay for roads or whatever. And there are some things that are human rights issues. Are people people? Mm-hmm. You know, that's just really what it comes down to. So when someone does something that they make cool art and you love and appreciate that art, but then they do something that contradicts your values, when can you separate the art from the artist and when can you not? And this is a very tough road to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, social media, we get exposed to this all the time. I mean, you know, Twitter, super common. You follow people that you like their work, and sometimes they post or say something, whether it's directly from that platform or you hear in the news, and oftentimes that is pretty crushing, and you kind of think, well, what do I do now? Do I still enjoy their work? Do I still watch their movies or look at their paintings or listen to their music, whatever? And so that's what we're talking about today is art versus the artist, and when can you separate the two, if at all?
If at all. So I generally have 4 rules, but as Captain Barbosa would say, they're more like guidelines than actual rules. So this is just kind of my mental framework of how I navigate this issue for myself. And because I've had this conversation so much recently, I just thought it'd be worth sharing.
For sure.
So I am an art major. I've had this discussion a lot, way too many times than I care to count. But yeah, there's a lot of terrible stuff happening in the world, and it would drive you insane if every single infraction, big and small, completely canceled or invalidated anything that person was involved with. Totally. So at some point there kind of just has to be a line that you draw. And so these are kind of like, how do you draw those lines? How do you figure out when you can do art versus artist? And I know this whole introduction is abstract. This episode, we are going to be talking about real people and real issues. And so if talking about celebrities and their wrongdoings is triggering for you, this might not be the episode for you. But stay tuned. Keep listening. If you think this is something that is, worth listening to. Thanks for sticking around, and I don't know, this is kind of time to duck out now, and then we're going to start dropping names.
That's the disclaimer.
And throwing the hammer. There's the disclaimer.
So let's get going, Ben. What is your number 1 rule?
Okay, so my rule number 1 is, in the medium, is it literally possible to just change the person's name without changing any of the meaning or the content? So, just for example, let's just take Chris Evans. Mm-hmm. Chris Evans is an amazing human being, as far as I know. He is a lovely person. What if Chris Evans did something? Well, recap to him, like, I know Captain America existed before him, but to many, they are introduced because of him. They cannot see Captain America without seeing Chris Evans' face. So being, recasting Captain America is not just that simple. He's been doing this for however long the MCU's been around, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't just say, he's now, Bob Smith, but that changes the performance. It changes everything about it. So that is something that, cannot be divorced. Another example that I have is, this is much harder on screen and much easier, I think, with books. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So something that has been happening a lot on Twitter is J.K. Rowling has been coming out as anti-trans. And so if you are a person that, supports trans rights, and that all the stuff she has been saying is absolutely appalling. So how do you support, that and draw that line? And for me, again, like I said, books are a little bit easier because let's pretend for a second that she actually has a sister who's the complete opposite of her in every way. And she's actually the one who wrote Harry Potter. And, just because J.K. Rowling was more famous or something, like, put her name on it, right? Mm-hmm. If you just change the name, does anything about Harry Potter change? The words on the page are still the words that were printed on the page. So just kind of for me, that is kind of like movies, TV, much harder. It is literally the physical embodiment of the person. Mm-hmm. Books, for me, a little bit easier, although I totally understand that there are some books that are kind of wrapped up and embroiled with their authors. But right now I'm kind of at a point where I have a bunch of nieces, and my niece, some of the older ones are getting old enough that they're discovering Harry Potter, and they're kind of diving into this world of magic, and they're, loving it. And I don't even know if they could remember the author's name, but they know Ron and Hermione and, Harry. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of where do you figure out how to draw that line? And for me, the one thing is, can you change the name without changing the meaning?
Yep.
Can you think of any examples, pro or con, that kind of help illustrate that one?
I was gonna say this is very divorced from visual, or a lot of the time divorced from visual art. But music, this is essentially impossible. Like, you can't change the person behind the mic without changing the entire experience. So that is
Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, a lot of these, like, you'll have a lot of songs that you love, and then the artist, it comes out they did things and you can't support them anymore. And it is with music, that is one of those things of, you can't change the name.
Yeah,
that is still their voice, and I know it's their voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It's I agree with the book thing. It's much easier to divorce the art from the artist. But boy, there's some stuff you just can't change. I agree with a lot of people. Like, Chris Evans, he is Captain America. Like, I didn't care about Captain America before his portrayal, and
absolutely,
boy, that's.
By the way, we're saying Chris Evans is a beautiful, wonderful human being. But if something were to happen, we're just throwing that out as an example of Chris Evans is Captain America.
Yeah, as of this point, we think he's cool.
as of right now, we're pretty sure he's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, music fans, boy, that's a hard one. I'm not sure. That would be a hard one for me to personally separate.
And I think the other thing with that is, like, if you had a band, mm-hmm. and, like, person number 4, like the drummer / backup singer, mm-hmm. did something terrible, it'd be a lot easier to divorce them from the music, mm-hmm. than because they're probably like the third drummer for that band anyway. It's
funny you say that. There are some artists that I don't listen to anymore because, like, one of the leading members of the band did something bad. But I agree, and I know this shouldn't make any difference, but if it's like some member that doesn't matter as much, I might not make that distinction, which I totally get how that shouldn't make any difference, but for whatever reason, it kind of does in my head.
This actually leads into rule number 2.
Yeah.
So my rule number 2 is, does consuming that medium, reading, watching, listening, whatever it is, does consuming that medium remind you of the artist who made it? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the example of listening to music, you're hearing Michael Jackson's voice, mm-hmm. as you listen to his songs. When I first watched Secret Life of Pets, I did not realize who the main actor was. It was just something that popped up in my Netflix queue, and then I started listening to it, and Louis C.K. is the voice. I'm like, oh, hell no, I can't do it. And that was one that I only got like 5 or 10 minutes in, and I just couldn't do it because his voice was, I don't know, for lack of a better term, it was just kind of constantly reminding and triggering this reinforcement of all of the horrible things Louis C.K. has done. And so I'm super glad that they recast him to Patton Oswalt, because that guy's fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that dovetails so well with the band. Like there are many bands where you really associate with the band with like one or maybe a couple people, and the rest is kind of like who cares. And I feel bad for you, like second
I feel bad for
guitarists or backup
all the second
singers.
guitarists and bass
Yeah,
players.
like, well, I mean, there are some famous bass players out there, but I feel bad for you because I know that's like super mean of me. But sometimes that just that association just isn't made. That being said, though, there are plenty of artists where they play theoretically more of a backup role, but they are the star.
True.
Yeah,
Almost any new pop song, there is a whole team of people that did the entire song, and the person's just singing it.
Yeah. Yeah, like there are tons of lots of pop artists. They don't write their own music. Like there's some lyricist from across the world that writes their music for them. Maybe that lyricist did something awful, but I don't know. So sometimes that who knows? Like maybe I'm partaking in something that was made through somebody who's not good, and I don't know, but the artist didn't do anything wrong, or maybe the inverse. Like I realize I'm not listening to an artist maybe because they did something wrong, and that's potentially affecting in a tiny infinitesimal way affecting people who work on that team for that pop artist. But sometimes it's just too hard to get over those things. So
when I'm watching a TV show and I'm getting fully engrossed in the plot and story, I'm thinking about the characters and the people, maybe the actors once in a while, but I'm not gonna know that, like, oh yeah, by the way, the director for that was really really crappy person.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do. Sometimes this is such a quintessential, like Tarantino, right? You watch a Tarantino film, you just watched a Tarantino film
because he's in it.
There's that, but just like literally everything about it just screams Tarantino. There's no divorcing his name from his films. But there are other directors that like I cannot name because most of the big blockbusters are just they needed to slap someone's name on this giant studio thing. So I don't know who it is, right? I don't know the background. I just know the face I'm seeing on screen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's directors where you really know their work, and then there's directors which are also super talented, but they are there to like kind of execute something really well and not color it with their own artistic sensibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like with the Harry Potter movies, like can you name every director off the top of your head of all the Harry Potter movies?
No.
I know Alfonso Cuarón did one, and I know the I forget who, but there was
Chris
one
Columbus.
director that did like 4 through 8.
Yeah.
That just kind of like finished the series. But the first couple of ones, like I don't remember. So that's another thing. So rule number 3 that I have is there is this kind of ongoing continuum, right? So when you are a child, it is a place of, like my nieces that I mentioned earlier, it is a place of innocence and discovery and just joy for finding these things that you like, right? So then you grow up, you realize the world is burning around you and people do awful things, and you start getting more context to some of those things that you liked earlier. So for me, there's kind of this very wiggly, timey-wimey line of of like that separates before and after.
Yeah.
Of when you learned about the person or celebrity's awfulness. So for me, J.K. Rowling was just like 2 years ago, maybe something like that, where she really came out on Twitter as being kind of a awful, hateful person. But I loved all the Harry Potter books growing up. My nieces were reading them. I enjoyed and quoted all the movies, that kind of thing. So there's kind of this before and after, and anything that I did before is, I don't want to say completely shielded and protected, because that's a very thin bubble that can pop kind of easily. But yeah, there is kind of this like that was before, and then she's like, oh, I'm gonna write a new book. I'm like, I can't support you. I will not read your new book.
Yeah, that is a same thing with me. Like Harry Potter, I had read all the books and watched all the movies before I had any knowledge of her. That is similarly shielded a little by the most thin of shields.
It is. It
Yeah.
really is. So I know there's another thing with like Joss Whedon, where I had watched Buffy and Firefly and Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, all things I love to rewatch
So good.
and quote. They're all fantastic. And then I learned that he actually has a long history of sexual harassment on his sets. And so that's the thing where it's like, oh, like I now there's kind of a new context coloring these. So some of them they might be, popped that bubble, like the Cosby Show. I know that in Dave Chappelle's stand-up, he actually talks about Bill Cosby being his comic hero growing up, and then finding out that Bill Cosby is a sexual predator. Of like, I can't do that. There's this before and after, but that line can get popped very easily. And for everyone, kind of how much force it takes to pop that, it's different. But that is kind of a line that gets drawn somewhere, where it's like, I can do things that you made that are kind of in that safe before space, but I can't do anything after. That knowledge is there. I can't keep supporting it.
Yeah, agreed.
Rule number 4 that I have is the art bigger than the artist? So with books, that when I was talking earlier about books are easier to divorce, on this rule, they're actually harder to divorce, because the book was written by the author. That's it.
Yep.
But when you're working on like a huge movie, there is a much larger context at work here. That person could be a very small cog in a very large machine. I know, talking about Joss Whedon, like he did a couple of the MCU movies, but there's a huge studio and tons of producers and other people and a bajillion other movies with other directors, and he just, was a very small part of that. And to me, those don't even feel like Whedon-esque movies.
No, this is one that I struggle with to some degree. That like there's stuff that I like for things beyond, many artists and talented people beyond that one person. Like, it is hard for me to sink an entire thing that I enjoy just because of that one person. Like, so for Whedon's work, like there's so much great stuff in his work that has nothing to do with him, or that he didn't really make so good. Like Firefly, right? I like Firefly a lot. I'm not one of the nutty, like, crazy people about it, but Firefly to me is great because of the
excellent acting, excellent storytelling.
Right?
It's excellent. Just everything about it is just kind of so charming and world building and interesting.
And so much of that was not Whedon. So much of that is the skill of the actors, the set designers. Like, he didn't do all of that stuff. I mean, maybe he kind of was sort of in charge of it, but a lot of that stuff really wasn't his vision. It was the humongous team of artists that acted and built that world. And for me, it's kind of like,
without Nathan Fillion, it would not have been the same.
Well, true. Like,
there's that too.
He carried it. but I'm just saying, like, it one of the things that I totally understand, because I do this too, is sometimes I watch or enjoy things with that knowledge, but really because I support everything else around that project and not necessarily that one person. And sometimes, depending on the severity of that one person's actions, you can do that, or the scale of the project, or their involvement or direct input on the project, and sometimes you can't. But I totally get the struggle with stuff like that. Personally,
that's why I said the
try
line
to
is
enjoy
so
the
wibbly
rest of the
wobbly.
work. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know I've had this discussion with a lot of people recently about the new Mulan, actually, because they're like, we want to support female-led stories, we want to support minority-led stories, we want to support, the seeing representation on screen. There are all of these things that are good about it. But, when the actress was supporting China's crackdown against protesters, like, where do you draw that line?
Yeah. It's a difficult one. I draw the line with Mulan on the fact that the movie is not good, and you should just watch the animated one. So no,
I mean, there's that. There's also that.
Just watch the animated one. It's so much better. It's arguably even more realistic. I've seen it. Just trust me on this one.
You know what else is more realistic? Kung Fu Panda's depiction of Ki. But you know what? I think that's a discussion for another episode.
We're gonna start a movie podcast now. Oh man.
No. So, yeah. So rule number 1: is it possible to change the person's name without changing any of the context? If yes, it's a lot easier to divorce art from the artist. Cool. If no, maybe that thing is sunk for you. Rule number 2 is: does consuming the media remind you of them? Like you mentioned with music.
Yeah.
If it's constantly reminding you of it and constantly triggering some experience that you had, or constantly triggering the remembrance of the terrible actions they did, then that's sunk. If I don't constantly, hear it and think of, because they recast Louis C.K. in Secret Life of Pets, if I'm hearing Patton Oswalt, I'm not thinking about the first one. And then rule number 3 is that before and after of like your knowledge continuum when you found out. There is definitely something to be said for, I enjoy this and this has now grown bigger than them, but they're starting this and I can't support the after here. And then of course the bigger than them thing is the art bigger than the artist? Like Harry Potter has grown, I feel like at this point, far beyond J.K. Rowling, to the point where there are, other things about it that people love and enjoy regardless of her. All 3 of the main actors have come out against her statements. And so I want to stand with all of them. I want to support them.
Totally. Yeah, it's Harry Potter being a great example. A lot of people like Harry Potter for the community around Harry Potter, and they don't really some people don't even care about the movies. Like they're just like, I like this community. People I remember there's like college Quidditch, like Muggle Quidditch teams and stuff. Like there are people that are in it for that kind of stuff, for the community, and not because they just love J.K. Rowling so much. And that's totally valid.
Yeah. By the way, I'm a Ravenclaw. What are you?
Same, yeah. Ravenclaw, 100%.
Although everyone tells me I'm a Slytherin.
Really?
I think it was one of those things of like, I got the choice, and I'm like, no, I think I'm more Ravenclaw than Slytherin, but whatever.
But ranking the houses, that's the hard one.
Oh.
that causes some lost friendships. All right. What's your final rule?
Yeah. The last final rule to cap this off here is that there are no concrete rules that are good across the board without exception. If anything is personally ruined for you, even with the 4 rules that I set out above, your feelings are valid, and that is okay. And no one has the right to argue with you or belittle you or say, well, you really need to divorce the art from the artist. Like, sometimes you can't. Like I mentioned, Bill Cosby, right? You can't watch The Cosby Show, at least for me, and divorce the art from the artist. It is called The Bill Cosby Show.
Yeah.
So I also think that it's just very kind of like mean and belittling of someone to say your feelings don't count. I'm more intellectual than you.
Yeah.
And that's not okay. Also, don't be a dick online. We keep saying this.
Another thing kind of along these lines is you mentioned your nieces. Like, this is something that this whole discussion is to help people think through this issue and think about it potentially in a more objective way as much as we can. We're just trying to help. That being said, with younger fans, be careful, right? Like, I understand the desire to want to spread the word, so to speak, and say, hey, J.K. Rowling is a jerk. And for my adult friends, maybe we talk about that. But I I know you have nieces, like I have, young family members that they're so into it, and it's so cool to see that excitement and that engagement in something that brings them a lot of joy. I am not going to be that person who says, "Oh, well, guess what she did? Like, you can't like that anymore." Like, just like on a certain level, just let people like stuff, especially if they're young. That joy is such a great, beautiful thing, and don't ruin that. Let them discover that for themselves later on. So, like, if if an adult friend of mine was like, "Oh, isn't J.K. Rowling the best?" then I might say, I don't know about that. But for a little kid who's like, wow, I really, a little kid that's like really into Hermione, like, isn't it cool that
isn't Hermione the best? Isn't
Hermione the best? A girl is like objectively the best member of the team.
She's super smart. She's constantly saving them.
Right?
Like, yeah.
That is awesome. Don't ruin that positive experience just because you have that knowledge. That is something that I feel like we need to be a little bit careful about with this conversation, and is worth mentioning.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a conversation that, like, if I were the parent and it were my place to have that conversation with them, right? Which I know their parents will do that because they are responsible adults. So maybe it's the time to start having the conversation with, like, the 10-year-old, but maybe not with the 6-year-old.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly.
So time, place, context. But yeah, the final rule is really just you're allowed to have your own feelings, and that is valid. If you can't read Harry Potter without being enraged at the author, cool, that's fair.
No
if
problem.
You can't watch Mulan because the actress spoke out and supported police brutality, that's fair.
Sure thing.
If you can't enjoy the Chicago Bean because Anish Kapoor is a horrible person, then you are correct. If you say otherwise, you are incorrect. That is also a story for another day. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey through art versus the artist. Again, this is all just to help you think through it. We certainly are not expecting anybody to take this as gospel or the only way of thinking about this issue. This is just how we think about it, and how we're trying to help you think about it. So thanks so much for listening to our slightly off the track conversation, and next time we'll get back into some more photography.
We'll have some more photography tips, but you know what, even though this is slightly off track, this is about our opinions on creating art.
Yep.
And I think as an artist, this is something that you need to think about, that you need to discuss, and that you need to decide for yourself. Yeah. So even though it's a little off topic from the photography tips that we normally give, I think it's a valid discussion.
Yeah,
so
still very important.
I hope this thought helped you kind of think about it. Definitely kind of have this conversation with yourself and see what are the rules for me. If you have a good one that you want to share with us, go ahead and email us hello@photo-op.show, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel and we'll see that and respond to it. So yeah, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time with some new photography tips.
See you next time.
If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, you can email us at hello@photo-op.show.
Watch us on Ben's YouTube channel at NomCreative,
as in Om Nom Nom.
Share this with a friend, and you can listen to Photo Op anywhere podcasts are sold.
Or download it, 'cause it's free.